thank you very much indeed for an incredibly comprehensive walk through some of the strategies, the methods, the approach, the techniques for, making the most of the teenage lesson. Um, there was so much there. For you, what would be your bullet pointed 3 top tips for surviving teenagers and indeed for enjoying teaching teenagers?
Not the same, is it?
So maybe go with the second half, which if you actually think about it, everyone, this is a great example of what the Willises describe in their book on task-based learning as a listing exercise. We're listing some of the ideas, we're prioritizing them. Back to you, Cristina.
Which question did you want me to focus on? Number 2?
Let's do the one about your 3 top tips for not just surviving, but for really impactful, enjoyable lessons for the teenagers rather than for the teacher.
I think at the core is, and I know it sounds very boring because everybody has always said that, but it's teach the students, not the lesson. Really find out what they want, what they need, and step away from, oh, I have to do page 32. Teenagers are such that they know when it just doesn't concern them, and that's when you have this complete disengagement. They're bored, they're not listening, and then you start having all these behavioral issues that will arise because of their boredom and that disengagement. If you teach the learners and also you jump in when needs be, step away, put the learners forward. So that the first one is teach the learners, not the lesson. Number 2 is step away, put the learners forward, as in let them do the work. And you are here on the side to help with. So you help with lexis, you help with grammar. And sometimes these little helping session can turn into mini lessons or even a full-blown lesson, but it will be due to the learner's needs. And the third one would be try to enjoy it. They know when you're here just for the paycheck. I mean, we're all here for the paycheck, fair enough. But if it shows that you're not interested in them, they're not even going to listen to you. You have to be empathic. Like, when sometimes they tell you, even when they misbehave, there is a reason for this. Okay, so stop thinking that they're out there because they hate you and you're in there and you want to get out, because they can feel that. If this is not what you want to do, then find a way out, because otherwise you're going to be miserable. So those would be my main 3 points. What about you, Neil? What would be yours?
As we were talking, I was thinking about theories of motivation, not necessarily in the language classroom, but more generally. And I was thinking particularly of Maslow and Herzberg, and this idea, and I think it chimes into your second and third points about responsibility. That, in the world of work, paying someone more money doesn't actually do much for them. It's a hygiene factor. The absence of the enough money becomes a demotivator, but more money isn't actually a motivator. Giving someone responsibility is. And I wonder, therefore, going back to your point about, the different groups of teenagers, it's certainly the case, I think, for the older group, the 14 to 17-year-olds, that we can give them responsibility and see them and guide them to taking responsibility for teaching one another, for their own behavior, and for guided autonomy. To what extent do you think we can give responsibility to the younger teens, the sort of lower secondary, the 11 to 14-year-olds, and how does that fit into? Because after all, if you're giving, task-based learning, that presupposes a learner-centered, learn learner agency responsible classroom. Does that fit in, do you think? Because that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right. Agency is I mean, I hate to say it, it sounds like a buzzword, but it is at the core of it. I mean, you mentioned that giving them responsibility for teaching, giving them responsibility for learning. And Zofia was saying that in the chat that the teenagers really enjoy when they can educate the actual teacher, so herself, when it comes to fashion and Gen Z vocab. And this is also something that you have to give them the agency to, and the responsibility is like, I don't know what you mean, and really mean it. Like, please tell me. So I think this is very, very important in the case of older students, definitely. Younger students can also be given, but they'll need more scaffolding, as in the activities will need to be way more scaffolded. So imagine you want to do something like teaching others, maybe younger learners. You don't give them, let's say, or even teaching each other. You don't give them an entire lesson initially. You tell them first, like I mentioned, I don't remember if I mentioned it, first make them responsible for giving instructions, or at least at the beginning, giving feedback. So they have the answers and with an answer key and with some explanation. Then make them responsible for another part of the activity. Let's say once they've done it, maybe, because just distributing handouts, that's not giving responsibility. That's not bad.
It's
Okay.
token, isn't it?
So basically, give them responsibility for mini sub-stages of the activity. And then as they show their ability to be responsible and to be trusted, then you can start giving them the more important ones, like giving instructions, setting up an activity. So I think it's just about scaffolding. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with you, but I think it's also interesting, and this is based on personal experience, that you give responsibility to the very students in the class who you think are the ones that least expect it. You don't give, you give responsibility to all of the students, but you may in fact give special responsibility to the quote unquote naughty ones. You're smiling. Is that something you've had experience with?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it has to be, because the feeling of being disengaged, how are you going to pull them back up by saying, oh, you need to study? That's not going to work. But if it's, okay, I need you here. Can you help me out? But for real, because if there is one thing that teenagers, and I know from experience, I'm a mother of a teenager, I know definitely there's one thing that teenager can smell it, and I'm sorry to say that, but it's the two little letters, B and S. Okay,
Yeah.
they can smell it a mile away. So when you pretend that, oh, I need your help, no, don't. Either don't ask them, or either really need it, as in, this is what you're going to do. I'm going to give you that. If it messes up, I'm going to have to catch up on it. I'm going to have to do something. So please don't. Okay,
That
I
was something
really
else.
believe it works.
That was something else I wanted to come back to. In terms of safe spaces. You've talked about giving students space. You talked about it within the context of task-based learning. But I think also, if we go back to some of your characteristics of Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, but I think of teenagers generally, perhaps because of the risk aversion, it's becoming more so that teenagers, regardless of their culture, don't like to be shown up.
Yeah.
And therefore, if a teenager feels that they've messed up, then there is a critical moment for the class and for the individual. And therefore, the space to be able to get it wrong. And then when it goes wrong, not to give an authentic, oh no, it was fine, when it clearly wasn't. So we've got to be an authentic. So what are your views in terms of the creation of spaces where students can assume responsibility, where they can get it wrong, and they can learn that that's okay because their face isn't going to be affected? What kind of easy classroom behaviors do we need to adopt to get the students into that safe space, that they feel it's fine for me to mess up.
I think it's all, again, it's all about doing it in small increments. So when something happens in the classroom, let's say somebody gets something wrong, don't overreact and don't show what you mentioned, that fake, inauthentic response. Just go, yeah, no, that's not correct, but let's why do you think? And guide the learners to get to the correct answer. So if you you create an atmosphere whereby somebody messes up, but you give them the tools to fix their error or their mistake, then it creates a safe space of, don't worry, you can make it better, and I'll be there. If you can't, I'll help you, and we'll do it together until you can do it on your own. What about you, Neil? What do you do?
I certainly like that point about scaffolding. I think it goes beyond what's right and wrong in terms of the answer to the question. And I think the safe space, I mean, obviously, if as the language teacher, you're doing something on the present perfect and the past simple, and they get it wrong, you think, really, how on earth can you get that question wrong? Our body language very often gives it away.
Yeah.
So I think we have to attend to our body language. We have to know how to apologize when we got it wrong. So if we make a student look inadvertently stupid in class, I think we have to have the guts to say to that student quietly at the end of the class, you know what, I messed up there, and I'm sorry.
Definitely. I agree. I mean, how many times, sometimes, unfortunately, I'm a little bit sarcastic. So I'll say something and then
Really?
me? Never.
Never.
And then I'll realize and I'll go, guys, and I'll turn around to the person and I'll go, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say anything that was, and they go, no, I know, we know you don't. I said, yeah, but it could be, and I apologize, I didn't mean it that way. So the level of sarcastic remarks that I make in a training session and a teaching context or anything, I had to literally just stop doing it. And I know it's something that, okay, most people will take well, but what happens if there's one or two people that don't? So it's very, very important that even though you say, oh, well, it's okay, they'll understand. No, they won't. Or they might just, they might just resent. And once a student resents you, especially a teen, then you've lost him for the year. And I think something very interesting, Neil, going back to what you were saying about, losing face. There is also when they misbehave, when they are off, they are misbehaving fully. Instead
Yeah.
of losing it in front of everybody, you just go, I had read this somewhere and I tried it once. It was like, listen, I feel that right now you need to go wash your hands, put a little bit of water on your face, go for it. And they go, no, I don't need it. Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? You give them the option of leaving the room with, their pride intact. They go. And when they come back, most probably they've chilled out. You don't send them to the principal, just go, what about if you just, go out for a minute, wash your hands, put a bit of water on your face. You come back in around 5 minutes and we'll discuss this further.
It seems, yeah. So it's rather than creating the fertile ground for conflict, we're actually dealing with conflict before it happens by finding ways to diffuse a situation where it's one of our creation. We have to take responsibility for that and own it. And if you've got a teenager who has a bad day, you just go, well, they're allowed to, because when did I not have a bad day? I
Definitely.
wonder,
Sorry.
I was just wondering then that you've talked a lot and very insightfully about laying the grounds for successful learning. You start to talk about project-based learning. You talk about task-based learning. You were talking about getting into the student's mind. Actually, all of which is relevant at whatever age, I think. just perhaps more so with teenagers. And therefore, I wonder with teenagers whether a lot of it is also down to classroom management.
It is. I mean,
We
that's one of the reasons why people don't like teaching at school. They say it's 95% classroom management and 5% teaching. But if you get it right at the beginning, it is very important. I mean, when you were saying about this, you know, these students that have a bad day, I think it goes back a little bit with the, somebody was mentioning in the chat about what do you do if they don't want to work in pairs or they don't want to work in group? Well, it's okay. It's one person.
let them.
You don't, fair enough. But you know, just highlight the possibility. Okay, but you do know you have to do X, Y, Z, and Z. Are you sure? You know, like, why don't you try, you do X and Y? And if you feel that you would like to maybe, you know, get some help with the other two, then maybe you could join a group and do something else. So you give them the opportunity the same way that in an adult class, when you have somebody who goes, listen, I don't feel like talking today. Do you mind if I just, you know, and you go, yeah, no worries. Why would you not extend the same courtesy to a teenager, especially, you know, these older ones, 14 to 17, you know, then they, I know they're still teenagers, but they do know, not all the time, but they do know what they're doing sometimes. When they're having a bad day, just let it be. Don't poke the bear. Just don't.
Yeah,
What's the
yeah,
point? Why? You know, sometimes it's a question of like, if somebody answers you with a little bit of a curt tone, just go, okay, and just walk away. Diffuse the situation. Why? Like, how can a 14-year-old hurt your feeling? He's a 14. Just let him be. And I'm sure, how many times this has happened where somebody misbehaved, and then by the end of the lesson, because I let them be, they come back to me and go, you know what, I'm so sorry, miss.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, or the day after or the week after, and they go, it wasn't about you, and
yeah,
I apologize, you know, like, or they, you know, in less articulate manner, obviously, but they go, yeah, sorry, miss.
yeah. No, absolutely. I watched quite a lot of teenage lessons in my role of observing new teachers this summer. And there was one particular lesson with a kid whose behavior was distracting. And the teacher, who was quite, she reminded me of some of the teachers I had when I was at school. So she had a kind of, her teacher personality was not herself. It was an assumption of what it's like putting on a coat. What's my teacher coat? And it was the teacher coat of you must behave. And I'm going, well, yeah, he was doodling. So what? Well, he wasn't paying attention. I was like, what if he was doodling? Because that's his way of processing what he's hearing. So I think, and it goes straight back to your point about knowing your learners. It's about, and this was the mistake I'm still making, but learning about is that not every single little bit of incorrect behavior in the classroom, the kid who's doodling, the kid who's misbehaving, let it go. Go in, for me, go in firm and friendly at the beginning, establish your guidelines, and maybe one student gets reprimanded more than you would do later in the class, just to set the boundaries. Establish a safe space where students know what they can and cannot get away with. And then you can start relaxing it. Because I actually think another thing in terms of the psychology of the teenage classroom is that students don't want, teenagers very often don't want and they don't expect complete freedom. They want the freedom within a parameter.
And also something very interesting is that if they misbehave, if they're doodling, if they're doing, it's not against you.
Yeah,
Teachers tend to generalize going, oh, he's doing this to annoy me. No. I mean, I personally, I doodle. Always when I'm listening to anything, to a lecture, during my Delta, I was doodling away. Why? Because that's how I process information. I can't have nothing in my hand. But also it was, and this is number one. Number two, you know what? If he talked back to you, it's not he has a problem with you. something might be happening at the back. You know,
Yeah.
something might be happening somewhere else. Don't take it. And I know it's so hard because we are all dedicated teachers that try so hard to do things well. But at the end of the day, what we can do is just realize that it might not be about you. You're not, you know, like what was that expression that young kids use nowadays? Main character syndrome. I think that, I'm trying. I'm
You're
trying
not
to
the
keep.
main character. Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to keep up with those terms. I'm getting a bit lost, but I'm trying. And it's true. We have main character syndrome. It's like, no, you might not be against you. So it's very important to realize that. And I think it helps a lot the teachers to go, yeah, he raised his voice, he did this, but it wasn't against me. It's okay. So it allows you to let it go.
Gabby's just made a point. We often just want to be 100% in control, expecting students to do exactly as we say. And that was, and probably still is, my weakness, or one of, there's more than one, in terms of what happens when I teach, because, you know, I'm ambitious for my students to be their best, be the best version of themselves, not just in English, but whatever it is that, you know, is happening in their lives. And sometimes you just need to go, yeah, having an off day. Don't I have the same? And just be nice to ourselves and nice to them as well. You know, be nice. It's one of the mantras of the school where I work.